The fragile hope for a Gaza ceasefire has tragically collapsed, shattering the already thin threads of peace in the region. After months of painstaking efforts, the diplomatic process has reached a standstill, leaving behind a void filled with uncertainty and escalating tensions. This collapse plunges the region into even deeper uncertainty, threatening to ignite further conflict and destabilize the already volatile Middle East. The potential ramifications of this failure are far-reaching, impacting not only the immediate parties involved, but also the broader international community. Months of intense negotiations, characterized by both progress and setbacks, ended abruptly this week, leaving mediators and observers alike stunned by the sudden turn of events. The reasons behind the collapse are complex and multifaceted, involving a combination of political, security, and humanitarian concerns. Adding fuel to the fire, former President Trump issued a statement blaming Hamas for the failure of the ceasefire talks. He went further, calling for their complete eradication, a statement that has been widely condemned as inflammatory and counterproductive to any efforts at de-escalation. Trump's remarks signaled a distinct shift away from diplomacy and towards a more aggressive, military-focused approach, raising concerns about the potential for further violence and instability in the region. This stance effectively aligns the U.S. with a hardline Israeli approach, potentially undermining any future attempts at mediation or negotiation. In a coordinated move, the U.S. and Israeli delegations officially withdrew from the ongoing talks in Qatar, signaling a complete breakdown in communication and trust. This withdrawal leaves a significant diplomatic vacuum, leaving few avenues for dialogue and increasing the risk of further escalation. Trump's explicit endorsement of a forceful strategy, coupled with his harsh rhetoric, effectively gives Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu a green light to pursue military escalation without significant international pressure. The international community now watches with bated breath, anxiously awaiting to see if these provocative words will indeed trigger a new, even more violent and devastating phase in the already protracted conflict in Gaza. And for millions of already vulnerable Palestinians, who have endured years of hardship and suffering, the future has never looked more uncertain, more bleak, and more perilous, as they brace themselves for the potential consequences of this diplomatic breakdown. The proposed ceasefire aimed to establish a 60-day truce, a period of respite amidst the ongoing conflict. It was envisioned as a window for further negotiations, and a chance to alleviate the suffering of civilians on both sides. Central to the agreement was a hostage exchange. 10 Israelis were to be released in exchange for a halt in Israeli attacks within Gaza. This exchange was seen as a crucial step towards de-escalation and building trust between the warring parties. For Israel, the paramount priority was the return of its captives held by Hamas. The safe return of these individuals was a non-negotiable demand, driving much of their strategy at the negotiation table. Beyond the immediate ceasefire, Israel sought the complete dismantling of Hamas's military capabilities and infrastructure within Gaza, viewing it as essential for long-term security. Hamas, on the other hand, demanded a complete and permanent end to the Israeli blockade of Gaza, which has severely restricted the movement of people and goods for many years. In addition to lifting the blockade, Hamas insisted on the release of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails and a guarantee of a permanent ceasefire, ensuring the long-term safety and security of the Gazan population. Ultimately, the gap between these demands proved too wide to bridge. The fundamental differences in objectives and priorities created an insurmountable obstacle to a lasting agreement. Israel remained steadfast in its refusal to end the war without first achieving its goal of eliminating Hamas as a military and political force in Gaza. Conversely, Hamas maintained its insistence on securing lasting relief and a guarantee of long-term security for the people of Gaza, a condition Israel was unwilling to fully concede. The talks ultimately broke down over fundamental disagreements regarding the sequencing of steps and the overall scope of the agreement. The core issue was whether to pursue a temporary pause in hostilities or to strive for a more comprehensive and permanent peace agreement. Despite months of intensive mediation efforts by international actors, these deep-seated divides proved impossible to overcome, leading to a stalemate in the negotiations. As a result, the negotiations ultimately collapsed, leaving both sides entrenched in their positions and unwilling to compromise. With no agreement in sight, the conflict continues to rage on, inflicting further suffering and devastation on both Israelis and Palestinians. With talks dead, Gaza's humanitarian crisis has spiraled. Starvation and death are rampant. Over 120 people, including 83 children, have died from hunger. Aid is nearly impossible to access. More than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed while trying to reach food aid, turning survival into a deadly risk. Children are the most vulnerable, with malnutrition deaths soaring since the blockade tightened. Despite mounting evidence, Israel denies widespread starvation, though some officials admit the crisis is dire. The disconnect between official statements and reality blocks urgent international action. The world is outraged by Gaza's suffering, with leaders demanding urgent action. Canada's Prime Minister called the aid blockade a violation of international law, echoing global condemnation. France announced plans to recognize Palestine as a state, signaling frustration with stalled peace efforts. The UK's Prime Minister described Gaza's starvation as unspeakable and indefensible. European leaders held an emergency call to coordinate a response, as over 100 aid groups warned of imminent mass starvation. The international community faces mounting pressure to intervene. The question, will outrage translate into real change? Under immense pressure, both domestically and from the international community, Israel has announced that it will now allow airdrops of desperately needed aid into Gaza. This decision comes as the humanitarian situation deteriorates rapidly. These airdrops will deliver foreign aid directly into Gaza, providing some level of support to the struggling population. This operation is being carefully coordinated with Jordan and the UAE, ensuring a collaborative and efficient delivery process. European nations are also mobilizing resources, stepping up to provide critical assistance. They aim to support these emergency efforts, providing funding, supplies, and personnel to bolster the aid delivery. However, it's important to remember that airdrops are generally considered a last resort, due to their limitations and potential inefficiencies. The move acknowledges the severity of the ongoing crisis, highlighting the urgent need for humanitarian intervention. Airdrops, while helpful, simply can't replace the effectiveness and volume of aid that can be delivered through ground aid convoys. Furthermore, this emergency aid doesn't solve the root problem: the ongoing conflict and the blockade that restricts the flow of essential goods. With ceasefire talks currently deadlocked and showing no signs of progress, and the looming threat of military escalation becoming increasingly likely, the situation remains incredibly precarious. Gaza's future remains bleak, overshadowed by uncertainty and the constant threat of further violence. International condemnation of the violence continues to grow, and the influx of new aid is a welcome, albeit temporary, measure. This aid may offer a brief moment of relief for the suffering population, providing essential supplies and a glimmer of hope, but it's crucial to recognize that this is not a sustainable solution to the deep-seated problems facing Gaza. The world must decide if it is willing to take meaningful action, if it will finally push for a real political breakthrough that addresses the underlying causes of the conflict. Without a genuine commitment to peace and justice, Gaza faces the grim prospect of more violence, widespread starvation, and deepening despair for generations to come.